Good morning. So, last couple weeks have been challenging. Just a lot of ugly stuff been dealing with at work, like gooey dead bodies and child assaults of various kinds, physical abuse and others. And then, yesterday especially, real young kids, like 2 and 3 years old, and one of them was just really malnourished, had all kinds of injuries, old and new, like stuff that had clearly healed. Just really challenging stuff. People ask me sometimes if I ever want to become a detective, and in my current position I do a lot of the more complex investigations at the patrol level, but no, I don't want to be a detective, because first thing detectives typically do at my agency is end up in the child abuse investigations, because nobody wants to do them, with good reason. So the senior guys tend to drift more towards other sort of roles and investigations, and newer guys get saddled with most of the child abuse stuff, and I wouldn't be able to do that stuff every day. It would just wreck me. It's one thing when you're dealing with adults who are suffering the consequences of their own poor decision making, but it's another when you've got innocent kids who, were just born into a family that's a mess, and they don't really have a great outlook going forward in life. Some people are able to, despite the circumstances of their birth, lift themselves out of bad situations through sheer will and tenacity, but those are rare individuals. And when you start life with those kinds of disadvantages, it's tough to break out of that. And we need something in place to try and create opportunity for those people, at the social, political level. What that looks like, there's a lot of disagreement about how we go about doing that, but there's got to be something, right? Because those kids are innocent. They didn't ask for that. They don't deserve that. They deserve, a fair shot, just like everybody else. So, and when I've got new recruits and I'm training, we talk about these things, right? Because you've got to expose recruits to as much different kinds of stuff as possible, right? You have a narrow window, relatively speaking, to a whole career to get trained and be competent on a wide variety of types of investigations, incidents that you might be responding to, and so you stay really busy when you're training someone, because you're constantly throwing new stuff out at them, right? Taking them out of district to another area where there's a certain type of call that they haven't taken yet, so they can get exposure, so they have something to draw on. Even though no two calls are exactly the same, they've got an idea how to go about doing certain things, because they may only see it once or twice during training if it's kind of an infrequent sort of thing. And you talk about it afterwards, because some of it's really ugly, and especially for new folks, they don't know how to process that stuff. There was a shooting at a strip club a couple years back, and a coach and his recruit showed up, and there's an individual on the front step, with his head opened up and gray matter on the ground, and a recruit just it wrecked him. Just couldn't deal, right? And not everybody can, but it was just shaking, like tremors and dry heaving, and weeping, because they'd never encountered that sort of stuff. Especially the last few years, it seems like we hire younger and younger people, and maybe that's just a consequence of me getting older, as they look younger, and some of them are just baby-faced. I don't think I was that baby-faced when I started. I was 26 when I got into the career. which is still young, but like I'd lived a little bit of life, like I'd done some stuff. And there's folks who in their early 20s trying to get into this career, and they don't have a whole lot of life experience to draw on, you know. and so how do you then process just what for most people is like, you know, a horrific scene that they might come across once or twice in their life, if that, and tell them like, this is going to be, you know, maybe not your everyday, but this is going to be kind of the nature of the world you live in now. And how do you incorporate that reality into your life and the way you handle things, the way you deal with things, right? And I've said before, you know, stress or trauma, it's cumulative. And yeah, I mean, it's funny how things will eat at you and you don't know it. I had, like, in pretty close succession, like 3 pretty like intense incidents with people wielding knives where I was just a couple pounds of pressure on the trigger away from ending that person's life. Where in one instance I had made the decision to shoot, and I was justified to do it, and but for somebody else hitting them with a 40 millimeter less lethal and them going down, that person would have died. That would have been by my hand. And my brain didn't really know the difference. Like I had in my mind already done the deed. And the fact that this person was now alive and I was riding with them to the hospital was surreal. You know, and they were talking and joking, and you know, and the whole time I'm just thinking like this person, like in another reality, and you know, the grind and manufacturing quality of the trigger in the rifle I was carrying that day being slightly different, you know, would have, you know, a rifle round between his shoulder blades and not be here sitting next to me in the ambulance now laughing and joking about what had just transpired, you know. And this person was actively trying to break down a door with 2 weapons in his hands and his family on the other side. Like, you know, it was really close. Like, it could not have been closer. And I had like 3 of those, like in quick succession. And the first 2, I'm just like, wow, that was interesting. But the third time, and like somebody had thrown a knife at me and was, you know, stabbing themselves in the chest, demanding that I end them. And again, they were running towards a building, an occupied building. Like, there's a bunch of people in there, weapon in hand. And I made the decision and communicated to the other officers on scene, having exhausted the available less lethal options to me, that if that person made it to the door, we could not allow them to get inside and have access to you know, a couple dozen potential victims, right? And again, I had made the plan and was, you know, making the decision to take lethal action, and then somebody else with a fresh taser and an additional cartridge was able to finally disable her enough for me to quick holster up my gun and go hands-on without getting stabbed. And you know, we took that person into custody and got them help. And like the third time, like, I was just, it affected me differently, like, and it was a little surprising, and I was like, what's going on, right? Like, it snuck up on me, like, oh yeah, okay, so like, even though I hadn't actually done the deed the last couple months, I'd basically, in my mind, had already done it 3 times. And this third time, it was just, I I was done. And I found my field supervisor. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna, type up a quick report. And I'm going home. I don't need to be here right now. My head wasn't in a good place. It was bad, and the agency started to recognize after that, maybe we don't need to actually have the critical incident protocol in place for just when there's actual body count. There can be other things that it's close enough, and maybe we need to give somebody a week off to kind of process and collect themselves, and get their head clear, and hit reset a little bit before they come back to work and are dealing with people. There was another incident years before that where somebody from another agency had been shot multiple times, and I was on scene, and I was in a wreck, and I got back to the office, and I was a mess, right? I mean, this wasn't a close friend, but it was somebody I'd known and worked with for a couple years, and the scene was ugly, and things did not go well. I mean, anytime it's somebody who's in mortal danger, fortunately you survived. I mean, it's not a good day, but I was right there, and initially it was like, well, get a new car because you wrecked one, so go get another one, and go back to work. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I was kind of surprised, and somebody else took that supervisor aside and be like, hey, no, he's not okay, you need to send him home. Oh, okay. So I went home, and I was home for a while, which is good, but yeah, there's things you deal with, it'll surprise you how it'll affect you once you've seen it a number of times. And so how do you deal with that, right? Because you can't tell your family everything, right? And I mean, there is kind of a stigma, as much as we try to professional help and therapists and things like that, and there's certainly a place for those people. And again, you don't want to burden your friends, especially people who don't really understand. And some things you want to talk about, and some things it won't register what you actually experienced. And then on the flip side, just if you only talk to other cops about the things you deal with, you're never getting that outside perspective. You're kind of I don't know how to say this. It's like there's no air coming into the room. You're in too tight of a circle. I don't know how else to say that. You gotta open up a window sometimes mentally, and get some fresh perspective. So it's a challenge, right? And especially if you're doing shift work. So a lot of your friends and family, you don't see them because you're working nights and weekends, and your sleep schedule is all thrown off. So your stress level is already at a baseline higher than most people, just because you're doing shift work and you're not eating well, and you're consuming large amounts of caffeine to be able to stay awake at 4 a.m. Unfortunately, the last couple of years I haven't had to work a late shift, although I'll be going back here shortly. But yeah, I mean, that just on its own wreaks havoc on your body, and then you add other stuff on top of it, and it's I have to get up at 4 a.m. these days to start my shift, to get up, get a workout in, such as it is, get cleaned up and some breakfast, and then get into work and have enough time to suit up and load the car up and get everything logged in for, a 6 a.m. briefing. it takes time, and like I can't get up any earlier than 4 a.m. It's hit and miss even if I get that workout time, which is, again, really crucial to kind of mitigating those stress effects, right? And vacations are important too. And again, with shift work and court, like, I have weeks where, I'm pulled in on an OT shift, or, have court or whatever else, and even my regular days off are not really days off. And you try to plan vacations, and I've got 2 reset requests pending on trials that got set during a vacation that I'm trying to take. And like the first like real extended like go somewhere vacation I have had in 4 years, 5 years, I don't know. It's tough, right? It's tough, but you do what you can, right? And you try to explain that to a recruit, and they get it, but they don't really know, again, until they've done it for a while. And I saw a story recently about a Washington state trooper who died at like 50, 51, something like that, just recently after he retired. He'd made the news because he told off the governor about COVID policies, and so he died of COVID or with COVID. And, people want to point to that and say, well, see, anti-vaxxer, this, that. But people don't recognize like the shelf life for cops after retirement is not so great. And I mean, and I've seen like senior guys, sergeants and down, who were just terrified to retire because this is all they know. They didn't cultivate and maintain and put in the effort to have a life outside of work. And when they're done, like their purpose for existing has come to an end. And I mean, it is not unusual for cops to die in their early 50s, late 50s, not long after they retire, because this job it will take years off of your life, as is evidenced by all the gray hair on my chin. I ran into somebody I went to high school with at a hospital while I was working, and my coworker was standing there, and he looked at him, the classmate, and he looked at me, and he's like, well, why do you look so old? I'm like, gee, thanks. As Indiana Jones said, it's not the years, it's the mileage, right? And yeah, the shit I've dealt with, it may be a little different from somebody who graduated high school the same year as me, even though he's working in the ER. And that comes with all of its own stressors and everything else. But I mean, you don't hear about nurses dying a couple years after retirement because they're worn out, right? I don't know. It's tough. And I'm not complaining. Like I said, I didn't really choose the job. The job chose me, and this, I could go do something else. But it's a reality of what we do. And people don't really realize that. And, whether you're looking to get into this job or you're just curious about what the career is like, these are things people need to know. So, thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, let me know. See you next time.